I want to ask like a related question, which is we've kind of been talking about the standpoint of personal injury law because obviously that's what you practice. It makes sense to talk about it. But I want to talk about a related field of law, but slightly separate. But I think you're going to have insights on this too, which is like, specifically corporate law. So with in terms of corporate law, it's interesting. A couple years ago, I was reading this book that you've probably heard of, Empire of Pain.
Yeah.
I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but essentially about the opioid epidemic, about the Sackler dynasty, how that got started, Purdue Pharma. And there was a whole section of the book that I almost couldn't finish because it was, as I recall, it was essentially like this whole part where Purdue Pharma is filing like injunction after injunction, like to delay the process of these cases by people representing victims, to go against the pharmaceutical giants, essentially exploiting every legal loophole in the book because they have unlimited resources to stop them from ever really seeing any real light of day, any real consequences. And that got me thinking at the time, and I think about it still to this day, is our legal system just irretrievably rigged in the sense that corporate giants like Purdue Pharma, they really can avoid any immediate legal tangible consequences. And the second question related to that is there any alternative or specific reform to amend that if so? Or is there sort of a way to fix it from within? Or is it just would it need just a complete reset?
It's a deep question. I think there's multiple problems and there's a great documentary on Hulu. It's not a documentary, but it's a great show on Hulu called Dope Sick that goes into all that as well. It's fantastic. The opioid epidemic in the Sackler family, that situation showed, I think, and shined a light on something that's been a big problem in this country that I do think you can solve. And that is you have all these ex-heads of all these government entities, right? So the FDA and all these government entities that are supposed to be there to regulate and protect people. Well, what happens to these people as soon as they leave the public sector? What happens when they leave their government position? They get hired by the Sackler family and they go to work for these big, corporate entities. And they are literally going from, I'm regulating you, my job is to make sure that you're doing things right, to now I work for you and my job is to make sure that I keep you out of trouble. And that's a problem. There's no one that can argue with me and convince me otherwise that that's okay. You're going to have a huge conflict of interest and you're going to have a lot of shadiness when you have a setup like that. So I think that's a big issue. And that's an easily correctable thing of saying, hey, for a 5-year period, it's almost like a non-compete. Once you leave this position, you're not going to go work in this industry for a private company for this period of time. I think
Would that be like a federal thing, or?
Yeah, I think that's something that the federal government, Congress, and the states, they could come and they could pass. And I think that that's something that they really should think about doing, because I think that will cut down on a ton of corruption. Now, the other thing that you asked about was protections, because a lot of times there's corporate shields, meaning that if you start a corporation and you do it the right way, your personal assets, your personal gains are not liable if the corporation were to get hit, sued, shut down. There is a corporate protection there. Now, there are ways to pierce that corporate protection, and in law we call it piercing the corporate veil, but it's very, very difficult to do. And so a lot of these individuals can stand behind these corporate entities. These corporate entities can do horrible, shady shit, get sued, hit with judgments, and then they just bankrupt out of that entity and start a new entity, and they're still sitting on all their cash. They're still sitting on all their personal assets, and there's no real liability or consequence for them other than having a good team of corporate attorneys that goes, okay, it's time to cut the cord. Now let's bankrupt this one and start another one. And you saw a lot of this with the PPP loans in the United States when that was all going down during the pandemic, where people would have a corporate entity that would apply for a PPP loan. They'd get that money, $250, $350, sometimes more. They'd spend that money on a bunch of bullshit. They'd bankrupt that corporate entity, and then they'd start another one, and they just basically pocketed all that PPP money. And there was no consequence for it. And so there are things that could be done to change those kind of legal protections, and they probably should be. Now, will they be? I don't know, because unfortunately the people that run this country, and I'm a person, I think both parties are absolute dog shit. I'll say that from day one. I think that the two-party system is very broken. I think we have a very corrupt government. I don't trust the government. I am one of those people. Call me whatever you want to call me, but I read a lot. I do a lot of research, and I'm pretty informed on it, so I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone that wants to talk about it. But I don't know if it will happen, because unfortunately the people that run this country are the people that profit off of those systems. And incentives. That's why you still see insider trading with the Senate and Congress, which is just absolutely insane to me that we all know, like,
Yeah.
oh, Nancy Pelosi's a better trader than Warren Buffett, but we're all okay with it. Okay.
Yeah, that's funny. That was the example I was going to literally use to engage with your point that you just made about, the idea that maybe we should have this like 5-year or whatever moratorium between somebody leaving public service like bureaucracy and then going to the private sector. And that's